So now, after toning the colors, what do we need to do? We need to roll the wire and make a stem for the flowers. We haven't made the stalk yet, so now we'll do it. Take the green clay that we used for the stems of the buds, so that they preferably have the same color. So, we crush it well so that it becomes elastic. Then we'll use latex glue. What are we doing? We take a flower and glue carefully the base of the wire with glue. We process a little on the wire itself. Now, you can make a small sausage. We don't thin it much, just press it. We form such a sausage, a cake, and gently grasp its wire. Form the stem with our fingers. The stem should be thin enough. You can process with such twisting movements, lowering down. Carefully, do not overdo it, so as not to break in any case. Look, the thickness should not be thick, not too thin at the stem. We will even measure with a ruler what thickness is obtained. Well, probably about 4 millimeters, because after all, the stem of the orchid is quite thin. Well, the same as we did for the buds, maybe a little thicker. Basically, it's at the bottom. Here. The middle may be slightly thinner at the beginning of the stem, and the base will be slightly thicker. Look, in such a stalk. Now we go through it with water like this with our fingers. Now we need to align it, to make it even. Because all the same, no matter how hard we try, no matter how carefully we do, clay has properties to form faults. We need to align. Make with water. Do not overdo it with water so that the flower does not get too much water. That is, we need everything to be neat. So, carefully. We will use a steel damp cloth to do this. So, you need to wipe somewhere. If you have joints somewhere and it is difficult for you to crawl with your finger, you can use a silicone brush. Dip it into the water and this joint between the petal and the base of the stem can be washed with a silicone brush. So that there was a smooth transition and there was no hole, so to speak. We wash gently. That's all. And if it is necessary, we remove the excess drops with the damp cloth. Here's what happened. It turned out to be such a stem. We will measure it in length now. About it, 5 centimeters. It turned out to be 5.5 centimeters. The length of the stem should not be too long, somewhere 5.5 centimeters. It is long. The thickness is about 4 millimeters. 5 millimeters. Even the narrowest 4 millimeters base came out. Here is such a stem. And what else will we do? Necessarily on the back of the tinting. Why didn't I do it before? Didn't tint the petals from the outside, right? Right here. Rather, it is the inner side of the petal. We tinted the front, but not this side. Tinting goes after the stem dries up. Completely assembly goes. And then, after assembly, the running tap, we have to tone petals slightly. And we tint the stem itself with a little blue. Let it dry for now. The same thing we do with the rest flowers. all stems should be with flowers and then we tint it to the end. Let's give the finished look. After we dried up stalk that we are done, we are now on the reverse side for toning. Do not leave it unpainted. We tint the leaves a little, or rather the petals. And of course we will make the stem itself tinted. To do this, we will again use a pastel and a brush. Now I'm going to mix them a little like this. Let's start with the top petal. We simply go down with smooth movements from top to bottom. Make a light tint. Do not paint too much. We need a smooth transition. You can even highlight the inner veins with such movements from side to side. So now side petals. The same thing, you can walk along the edge like this. And here, highlight the veins if they stand out well. Moreover, look, if this is a flower that is little colored, which comes first after the buds, then its tint should be quite pale on the black side. Lightweight on the back. If this is a saturated flower that goes further through the assembly, then you can tint it more intensely. Look at the flower that depends on the toning. Which toning was tinted, which toning was saturated or less saturated. Do the same tint on the reverse side. See how well the veins stand out. If you use these horizontal movements with a brush. Okay, that's it. I think this will be enough. Now we tint the base of the stem a little bit here. We can grab some petals. Not reaching the middle right here. We do a smooth color transition by the stem from all sides. You can fix it with your fingers like this. That is, look what happens. So, and also from this side, until the middle we tint. Here is such a stem. The same thing we do is absolutely with all the other colors. And after they're completely ready, the buds are completely ready, we will already start assembling. Build the branch itself. So the next stage is bud toning. We need to refine it as they are just green and the blue orchid has a slight bluish color. See what we're going to do. What color do we need here? Small buds, which are located at the very beginning of the twig, have a more saturated ochre. More blue, more intense dark. That is, the smallest in shadows will be. This bud, which is slightly larger, less colored, but also more blue. Now these buds will be touched by blue paint, a slight transition. Let's start with the smallest bud. Let's take and mix light blue and blue so that it is not so blue-violet, but the one we need. Bluish blue. And you can safely tint on the bud. Why am I toning again with pastels? In principle, the buds can be tinted with oil paint, but firstly, I need to keep the color that goes on the flowers so that there is no difference in shades in the buds and flowers. But the pastel in itself, too, when the buds are tinted, lie down more evenly. Yet again, smooth then oil paint. You can also make transitions beautifully with oil paint. So, but I really like pastels. It is cheaper, there are less problems with it. And it lays better, we can combine smooth transitions to do. Look, and most importantly, do you know what else is the difference? The buds of a living flower, they seem to have shine anyway. They are not made, of course. The claws of a small living flower, a living bud. After toning, we hold over the stem. Above the stem is slightly less than flowers, at a distance of about 10 centimeters above the stem, maybe a little more. You can, for example, hold it for 3 to 5 seconds. That is what happens with this. The pastel seems to be absorbed more strongly, and it turns out a small shade, not so made. That is, the pastel is absorbed more strongly into the clay, and at the same time the shine of the bud itself remains. I'll show you later how this will all happen. So, we apply tint. Look, we tint to the bud itself and tint to the stem a little. That is, you cannot reach the bottom to the end, that is, to the middle. So, this is the smallest bud. Now we take the bud a little more. We tint to the top, grabbing with a brush. So, now look a little base. In principle, we can leave the middle unpainted. Since we tinted the first bud completely blue, here we still leave green. You can still touch it with your fingers like this, shade it. And the stem the same to the middle. Here's what comes out. Such a color. Let me show you the difference between the buds. It is seen. One shade is more saturated, while the other remains more green. Smooth transition from top to bottom. Now the average bud size. We will paint. Now we brush off the pastel like this with a brush, so that there is no sharp transition. We grab the top. We are doing less intense color in the first place. And as if with a brush, slightly lower it, pastel, down. We make smooth transition, a little bit more intense to the top like this. Driving movements. We leave the middle less colored. That is, we practically do not capture it. Again, the base, with an almost semi-dry brush, is a little bit of pastel. Don't overdo it. See, don't you? Transition. Here is the middle almost unpainted. And we painted half of the stem. So that's what happens. It remains to paint the largest bud. The hands are blue. So brush off the pastels. Again, we do the same. Apex slightly. Barely touching with a brush. We do not press hard, so to express these veins which we made. And just a little bit from below. Smooth transition. That is, the bud should be barely colored. Mostly green. We paint the stem again to the middle. Here's what happens. Look, the bud is the last colored. That is, we are going from the darkest, smallest bud to the largest bud, but less colored. Do the same thing. All buds are made according to this principle. The larger the bud is, the less colored it is. The smaller the bud is in size, the more intense the color is. That's all. This concludes the bud toning. And the next step will be to create orchid leaves. What do we need for this? We need cold porcelain clay. You will need oil paint, very dawn green and herbal green. Veiners will be needed. I have such a clerical knife, cutters. Also you will need baby powder and glue may be needed. And the film. So what are we going to do? First, we take a small amount of clay to determine the color. This is for the first leaflet. I will now take a small amount of clay. And we will mix the color. First, you need to stir the clay to make it soft enough. Now we take the paint and we turn it into a cold color in approximately equal proportions, very dark green and warm herbal green paint. Our piece is not large and we take a small amount of paint. See, don't overdo it, so as not to get too saturated color. We need an intense green shade, but not too dark after all, because the clay still darkens when it dries. On 2-3 it, and then we will have further toning. We knead well. Now let's see what color it turns out. So, now let's add a little Veridon and knead it. Why do we make a small amount first? Since we need to understand what color is being obtained now. Be sure to leave a color sample. A small piece of clay. Let's make a leaf and then, according to this sample, we will need another clay. If you immediately mix a large amount of clay, which is necessary for all the leaves, then there will be a fairly large amount of clay. Either 1/4 clay from a whole piece of unpainted, then in principle, if it lies, you left in the next day, even in the film, it can become much denser. It will already be harder to work with it. So, we look. This is the color you get. This is normal because it will darken even more after drying. So, that's all. We close, remove the paint, and now we will make the leaves. Leaflet. Now I'll show you how I will do it. Let's get started. Look, in order to roll out clay boards of a sufficiently large size, we will probably use not a powder to powder the surface of the film, but a greasy cream, so that the clay will probably not stick already. Because the clay is, after all, the clay is soft and you don't want to suffer from peeling off later. I'm going to mist my hands like this and walk on the tape. I coat the surface lightly. Of course, look. Try it, maybe you will succeed. If your clay is not like that, either a powder or ordinary starch will be enough, so that you could just calmly roll out a layer of clay and make a leaf. In my case, I have to use a cream. Of course, I've already lost the habit of it. I mainly use either starch or talcum powder or baby powder. So, now I will take away the excess. The main thing is to make sure that we do not mix such a greasy cream into the clay itself in order to give elasticity. If you want to give elasticity to the clay, it is better to add a small amount of plain water. We take, look, a small amount of clay. First, we will make a medium-sized flower, and then I will show you how we will assemble the assembly itself. Let's start with the smallest leaves. So, place it carefully. In this case, it is very convenient to use a pasta machine because a uniform thickness can be made. The one we need. It is more difficult to do it manually, but it's okay. Now we will try. Look, the thickness of the roll should be large enough. Because the leaf goes without wire, and therefore it must be thick so that it will hold well afterwards. Therefore, the thickness of the rolling is approximately For small leaves, it is about 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeter. And the leaves that will be larger are already about 2 millimeters thick. Thicker. Here, look at the thickness. Here I have somewhere 1.5 millimeter. About it. The thickness should be looked at the edge and then measured. So let's make a medium-sized leaf. I'll take the cutter. You can generally use just hand cut. Then I'll show you how I will do it on large leaves. I cut it. See how I have it. You can change the shape with this. What have I done? Look, I will remove the excess. The shape of the leaf goes, and the base of the leaf goes slightly widened. What we need. See, we'll do it like this. This is done for the convenience of just attaching the leaves themselves. When we attach the leaves to each circle, we need this leaf extension. This is a very convenient option. We remove excess clay. Now, gently walk along the edge of the leaf with your fingers to thin out a little. Now we open the filament. Now I will try on, see if it fits or not in size. It will fit. We take the veiner. And look, here we treat it with cream and the veiner can be treated with powder. And at the same time, excess fat content from the cream will be removed, because the powder will absorb superfluous fat and excess moisture, and it will give a slight dullness. Of course, the leaves are not made, since we have to tint. Gloss is not needed especially. So what are we doing? Carefully remove the leaf. So, we take the veiner. We put our blank there. So, now a second. Now we'll remove the unnecessary if the edges go away. Press gently. We put it evenly. So that's what happened. Now we'll use scissors to remove all unnecessary. I'll cut a little here. Well, that's all in principle. The leaf is flat. Now, what do we need to do? We need to leave it to dry. We will now use dry napkins for this. Ordinary napkins like that. Now we will twist them and create original sides on which we will dry. Because the leaf should still have a slight bend. I'll show you now. If you have other drying options, that's great too. Let's see. If we arrange like this. So we put it between the napkins. Maybe lower the top of the leaf. So, and yet what else can you do? I just made a strip of foil like this. I just folded the foil several times. I bend and make the shape. Look, semicircles. Now insert this form right here at the very base of the leaf and grab it. See what happens. The leaf here has such a bend, like a hole like this. We collect the bottom of the leaf, somewhere approximately 2–3 centimeters. Let the rest dry. So let it dry up. And here it is raised and collected in this way, so that you can then attach the leaves. I hope everything is clearly visible. Everything is clear. That's all. So we leave it to dry. Next, let's start collecting the leaves. From the smallest leaf, I will show how we'll attach it to each other. And then we'll make the leaves already larger. Next is what we need. We need to make a frame of leaves so that later we can attach the entire composition, the entire orchid, and of course the leaves to the base. For this I will use a wire. I have a wire 1.5 mm thick. I divide it in half, that will be enough. The size is obtained. Not necessarily the same, you can take approximately. Here I have 20–21 cm. That is, the main thing is not to be too short. So, now, a bit of it. Since I have this wire without winding, smooth metal, I will use some tape to wrap it around so that I can glue it well later. I will not glue it. You can even plant it on glue, on the wire to hold well. Since then there will be leaves, then in principle it will keep normally. So, we will not wrap it up to the end. It can be somewhere like this. So look, I wrapped a little more than half with tape. If you have a wire with a winding, then it's generally beautiful. Then you don't need to wind it with the tape. So what do we do next? Look, now we need to make a small leaf that will be at the very top. For this we take a small amount of clay. So let's knead a little. So put it in the wire and roll it out. One millimeter thick turned out. So now what can you do? I take this metal cutter, or you can cut it by hand. I'm doing so. I narrowed it down, you see, it turned out a little in width, and now I cut out a small leaf. So I remove the excess clay. I got it, let's measure what size it is. 4 cm wide. Height does not matter at all. About 6 centimeters, because now we will fix it and the height will change. So we roll the edges of the leaf. Remove excess clay. Now we will use the veiner again. Let's go around, probably with a little powder, so that nothing sticks. We carefully remove and print. So, we print at the very top so that the drawing is printed as we need it. Exactly the one at the top, which the leaf has a drawing with all the bands we need. So, look, here's a small piece of paper. Now what are we doing? So we need to glue it to the wire. Since the clay is still damp and soft, I will use latex glue. I put the wire down. And now we carefully put it into the vein like this and wrap it in a leaf. We press this vein here, somewhere in the middle, maybe a little higher. So, embraced. Now you can open the top here a little, like this. Open the leaf. Look so that the wire is not visible. Here's what happens. You can even grab a little to this side. Then that we are now going to make a frame and the leaf will be visible only at the very beginning. The tail. So that's what happens. Further,